Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my must-start and must-sit players for week number 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Inside today's video, we'll begin by discussing my must-start players of the week, and then about halfway into the video, we're going to pivot into the must-sit category for week number 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season based upon their matchups on the week. But before we do get on into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I'd also like to ask, if you guys are on Twitter and would like to follow me, to please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the description. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 6 must-start and must-sit players. So we begin with the must-start category, headlined by running back Leonard Fournette of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going up against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia on Thursday Night Football tomorrow. Leonard Fournette right now appears to just be the clear lead running back in Tampa Bay. Going into the season, there was a lot of debates in the fantasy realm about who was going to be the lead back in Tampa Bay. Was it going to be Ronald Jones? Was it going to be Leonard Fournette? And how much of a role does Giovanni Bernard have in this offense, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers brought him in the offseason from the Cincinnati Bengals? So there were a lot of factors going into this, and going into this season, everyone was pretty unsure on which running back it was going to be. And it appears at this point in the season, Leonard Fournette is the guy. He is the clear lead running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if that is the case going forward, and he continues to see a majority of the touches, then Leonard Fournette is going to be a very valuable asset for fantasy football this season. Week 5, up against a bad Miami Dolphins run defense. He had 12 rushes for 67 yards and a touchdown, as well as having 4 receptions on 5 targets for 43 yards. This week, going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, to me, it is a no-brainer to fire up Leonard Fournette again in this game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers may be able to get up early in this game up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're going to want to run the ball out later on in the game with Uncle Lenny. And with the very minute usage of Ronald Jones in this offense, that really does up my confidence in Leonard Fournette, and I believe he is going to have a huge spot this week up against the Eagles, and that is why he is a must-start player for me on the week. Next up, we move to the tight end position with Zach Ertz, tight end of the Philadelphia Eagles, going up against the Buccaneers, also in the exact same Thursday Night Football game. Now, reports are that Dallas Goedert has been placed on the COVID IR, and with the game being tomorrow on Thursday, it is very unlikely that Dallas Goedert ends up playing in the game. And without Dallas Goedert, then the door is wide open for Zach Ertz, because now he's the clear number 1 tight end on the team, and Zach Ertz is on a team with Jalen Hurts, who likes to heavily utilize the tight end position, which gives an even further leg up for Zach Ertz to potentially finish inside of the top 10, maybe even as a top 5 tight end on the week, because a lot of the reason why Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert aren't typically top 5 guys every single week is because they are siphoning value off of each other, because they are both used very heavily in the offense. But now that one is gone, one might think, and I believe, that Zach Ertz now has inherently way more value than Dallas Goedert has in the games when Zach Ertz is there, because Zach Ertz is the only tight end option that is going to be out there in the game. In his last 3 games, Zach Ertz has gotten 6 targets, 8 targets, and 7 targets in the last 3 games, like I said. Last week, up against the Panthers, Zach Ertz was fucking atrocious. He didn't play very well at all. He was very heavily utilized in the game, but he didn't come down with any receptions aside from 1. So he had 6 targets, just 1 reception, and 7 yards. So obviously, that is a bad game, but on paper, at least he was targeted, and the hope here is up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a game where the Eagles are likely going to be down. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot throughout the game, and that could lead to a huge game out of Zach Ertz on Thursday Night Football. Next must-start player here is Emmanuel Sanders, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, going up against the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. Sanders has yet to have a game on the season with under 5 targets, and it is very clear, at least in my eyes, that he is the true number 2 wide receiver there. While they have Cole Beasley, for some reason, they're just not giving him the ball. They definitely did not give him the ball at all up against the Chiefs. Now, there is still some competition, though, because Beasley is there. They still have Gabe Davis, so there are other options to throw the ball to. And obviously, they have one of the better wide receivers in the NFL in Stefon Diggs. But at the end of the day, Emmanuel Sanders has carved out a decent enough role in this offense to where you can heavily rely on him week in and week out. And in a spot like this up against the Titans, it could be a complete and utter Hulk smash of a matchup. Last week, up against the Kansas City Chiefs, he had 3 receptions on 5 targets. And I mind you, 5 targets was the least amount of targets he's gotten all season. Every other game is at least 6 or more targets for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. Every single week, Emmanuel Sanders has the upside to get over a touchdown because of how good this Buffalo Bills offense looks. Josh Allen is playing out of his mind right now, and if Josh Allen and this Buffalo Bills offense continues to play this ferociously, then we could easily expect a huge matchup this week up against the Titans for Emmanuel Sanders. The Titans rank 25th in pass DVOA. 25th. First being the best, 32nd being the worst. So they're not very good up against the pass, which could lead to a humongous game out of Emmanuel Sanders. I believe Stefon Diggs is going to have that real big game that we're accustomed to with Stefon Diggs this week. But obviously, you're going to be starting Stefon Diggs, so there was no real reason to talk about him in this video, aside from that little quick note. Next must-start player is Taylor Heinicke, quarterback of the Washington football team, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Heinicke is coming off of an atrocious game, by far and away the worst game of his season since coming in for Ryan Fitzpatrick in that first game of the season. In that game last week up against the New Orleans Saints, he had 20 completions on 41 attempts for 248 passing yards and 2 INTs, but he did slightly save the day and not make it as worse by having 5 rushes for 40 yards. But again, that was a disaster compared to how Taylor Heinicke has looked thus far this season. This week, he's going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Kansas City Chiefs defense ranks 31st in pass defense via DVOA, and the Washington football team defense ranks 29th in the same category of pass DVOA, which makes it entirely possible that this is a very heavy passing back and forth game between the two teams. And I understand that a lot of people are poking fun at the Chiefs right now because the Chiefs haven't really lived up to what most people believe they would be this season. And I understand it. It's all fun and games, but at the end of the day, the Chiefs are still a really good fucking team, especially offensively. On defense, they're down tremendous. Like I said, 31st ranked up against the pass. But at the end of the day, they're going to be able to fight into this game. They're going to be able to play in this game, and Washington will be in the game as well, so this will lead to a very pass-heavy environment, which helps out both Patrick Mahomes as well as Taylor Heinicke. Final must-start player of today's video, and then, of course, we're going to pivot into the must-sits, is Hollywood Brown, wide receiver of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the LA Chargers. Continue to ride the hot streak with Hollywood Brown. Normally last season, the season before, Hollywood Brown was this heavily inconsistent player. He'd have these games where he blows the back out of a defense, and then the next week, the guy's fucking snoozing in your lineup, and then he has a couple snoozer games, and then once you're finally said, fuck it, I'm done with Hollywood Brown, then he has this excellent game while he's on your bench. This season, he hasn't really had a snoozer. Now, up against the Lions, he played bad, but that game wasn't a goose egg, which Hollywood Brown has done in his past. So obviously that Detroit Lions game is something to just look over at this point because he dropped 2 wide open touchdowns that he could have scored, and he showed that he can bounce back last week despite being virtually irrelevant, being not even looked at all by Lamar Jackson in the first half of that game where the Colts were absolutely shellacking the Ravens. He finished the game with 9 receptions on 10 targets for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. Even when Mark Andrews has a humongous game, Hollywood Brown is still very involved in the offense, so I expect Hollywood Brown to be in a big spot this week up against the Chargers in what could be a very, very high-scoring game in what is my personal favorite game to watch on the week, aside from my Dolphins versus the Jaguars, because I'm a fan of the Miami Dolphins. But before we get on into the must-sits, I would like to ask if you have ended up enjoying thus far, to please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that like button down below as well. So my first must sit is running back of the Baltimore Ravens, Latavius Murray, going up against the Chargers this week. And in reality, right, we're just talking about Latavius Murray, but we're really talking about every single running back on the Ravens because this backfield is a complete and utter shit show. It is the most murky running back situation in the National Football League. On Monday Night Football, up against the Colts, The snap share for the running backs went as follows. Latavius Murray, 49% of snaps. Devontae Freeman, 27% of snaps. And Tyson Williams, 19% of snaps. And despite Murray being in there for 49% of the time, he had 6 rushes for 17 yards and 2 receptions for 13 yards. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, Nick, you know the Ravens were down in that game, right? Maybe that's why they abandoned the run. And I understand that. But the split share there still concerns me. And this game up against the Chargers, they might not be able to just rush the rock aggressively in this game because the Chargers offense is really fucking good. And we saw the Colts penetrate that Ravens defense aggressively last week. So what do you think Justin Herbert's going to do to them? This is going to be a high-scoring, pass-heavy game, and with how murky this situation is, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Devontae Freeman outsnapped Latavius Murray this week. So at this point, just sit him down until this situation clears up, but it probably, honestly, won't by the end of the season. This is a very annoying situation, so sit down Latavius Murray, sit down Devontae Freeman, and sit down Tyson Williams. Next up, we got a quarterback for my next must-sit. That is Ryan Tannehill, quarterback of the Tennessee Titans, going up against the Buffalo Bills. Tannehill, week in and week out, has been a huge disappointment of mine, as he was a guy that I liked going into the season. They bring in Julio Jones. They have A.J. Brown. This is going to be a team that, while they're not a fucking super aggressive pass-heavy team because they have Derrick Henry, they still like to throw the ball. Tannehill has looked good ever since he went in for Mariota a couple years ago, but this year, things have kind of went downhill. A.J. Brown and Julio have gotten hurt, so I understand that you can put some accountability on that, right? You can't put 100% blame into Tannehill, but at the end of the day, Tannehill hasn't even been playing well when they were both in the game. Last week up against the Jaguars, 14 completions on 22 attempts for 197 yards and a touchdown, as well as 21 rushing yards on 3 rushes. This week, they're going up against the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills defense, who ranks number 1 in pass DVOA defense. The Bills, who last week shut down Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City offense. Now, I understand that the Kansas City Chiefs offense has looked like a shell of themselves, but at the exact same time, that is still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That is still a very dynamic offense. So imagine what's going to happen going up against Ryan Tannehill. You just can't start him this week. Next up, we move to a tight end, Robert Tonyan, Big Bob Tonyan, tight end of the Green Bay Packers, going up against the Chicago Bears in Chicago. Now I'm sick and tired of trying to make some excuses for Tonyan. He is a tight end that we all knew going into this season was so dependent on scoring a touchdown. He's very dependent on finding his way into the end zone. And last year, that was fine because he was scoring so many touchdowns. Basically, every single game he was finding his way into the end zone. But this year, in 5 games, he's only scored once. His last 3 games in half PPR have been 1.1 points, 1.8 points, and 1.3 half PPR points. That's not good. Last week, up against a beatable Bengals defense, he had 2 targets with 1 reception for 8 yards. Now, could he score a touchdown up against the Chicago Bears and completely derail this argument 100%? But with that said, it seems like all of those touchdowns that were going to Tonyan are now going to Randall Cobb, are now going to other options on this team. So while I think Tonyan is still a solid tight end, the usage there just does not warrant you wanting to start him. And again, because I said this, he's probably going to mosey his way on into the end zone this week. Next player is running back of the Philadelphia Eagles, Miles Sanders, going up against the Bucs on Thursday Night Football. There's a lot of players playing in Thursday Night Football in this video because I think this is going to be a great game. But you want to know who I don't think is going to have a great game, obviously? Miles Sanders, because he is a must-sit. Nick Sirianni, head coach of the team, straight up just refuses to run the fucking football. It appears that Miles Sanders is locked into this committee. All offseason, a lot of people were talking about how they love Miles Sanders. And I was telling people to calm down just a little bit, just back up a little bit, retract a little bit, hit the brake just ever so slightly, and understand that I know it's a new head coach, but I think this is still going to be a committee scenario. And in the offseason, there were reports of a committee, and people just, they closed their ears. They closed their ears. They weren't listening to that. They put in the fucking earbuds. They weren't listening, and now Sanders, guess what? He's in a committee. And they didn't even use Gainwell at all last week. They barely used Kenneth Gainwell, and still, Miles Sanders struggled. 11 rushes for 45 yards, and 5 receptions on 5 targets for 6 yards up against the Carolina Panthers. But Nick, you always talk about how the Panthers are a really underrated defense. Is that why Sanders struggled? Maybe. But guess what? He's playing up against the third best run defense via DVOA this week. Miles Sanders is going to shit the bed big time, and I believe that you cannot start him, you cannot throw him into your lineup until the team proves to want to give him the ball and until he has a successful game, because besides week number 1, this dude has been a complete and utter unmitigated disaster for your fantasy football roster. Final player of today's video, the final must-sit, Allen Robinson, wide receiver of the Chicago Bears, going up against the Green Bay Packers. The Bears' offense is simply just not throwing the ball a lot. Whether it was Bill Lazor, whether it's Matt Nagy, they're not looking to air the ball out. They're not letting that fucker fly Dan Marino style. And when they're not throwing the ball, that hurts, right? Match that with the fact that they're not even throwing it to Robinson. On the season, Robinson has 17 receptions on 29 targets, only 29 targets, for 181 yards and a touchdown in 5 fucking games. There are receivers that will get 181 yards and a touchdown in 1 game. And this is what Allen Robinson has in 5 games. I will admit that I was completely wrong about Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson has literally been dominant at the NFL level with Nick Foles. 9-inch Nicholas Foles, he's done it. With Kissin' Titties Mitchell Trubisky, he's done it with Blake Bortles. But for some fucking reason, he cannot do it this year with Andy Dalton. He was better with Andy Dalton and with Justin Fields. It's a shit show. It's a disaster. Up against the Las Vegas Raiders last week, 4 receptions on 5 targets for 32 yards. What are you supposed to do? He's just not getting the ball, and they're not throwing the ball. Again, like I said, whether Nagy's calling the plays or Bill Lazor, who's calling the plays right now, it doesn't matter. This is a disaster scenario. Code red for Allen Robinson. Don't start him until he starts to do something. And at this point, I'm not even sure he's going to start doing something. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure you hit that like button down below. I love you guys all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, goodbye.